Good morning. I'm Don Dickey, a member of this congregation, and I'm just delighted to welcome you here on a day when we're not getting the 2 to 6 inches of snow the people further north are having, as the weather gods are being a little fickle this spring. One of the things we do is set aside time to welcome guests, and that is this time. Are there any members who have brought a visitor or guest with them today? If so, please stand. Let us know their name and where they're from.
My name is Russ from my parents, and we brought our friend Beth.
Welcome. Are there any others who have brought a guest? Are there any visitors who would feel comfortable standing? Let us know your name and where you're from.
Very comfortable standing and saying hi. My name is Lita, and it's a pleasure to be here for a couple of days. I got here today to give everybody how to read, but I was a member here many years ago, over 20 years ago now.
Remember you well.
So thanks for being here this morning.
Welcome. And I also want to send a warm welcome to those of us who are joining via live stream this morning. And Kendall has a special guest.
I'm pleased to have with us this morning the Reverend Dr. Carol Hepokoski, a longtime colleague and friend of mine. She's a retired minister and seminary professor who has a long-standing interest in the figure of the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. She's on her way from visiting California for the winter to her summer home in Minnesota, and we were able to spend some time over at the Nelson Atkins yesterday viewing the magnificent temple statues and carvings of the Chinese gallery, which was an illuminating experience in her company. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hepokoski to our pulpit today. Glad to have you.
Now, after the service, we do have a Sunday Plus lunch. And for our guests, please let the cashier know that you are visiting, and there's no charge for you. Also, there will be a church chat in Conover on our budget, which for the upcoming fiscal year.
It's good to be here with you this morning. We gather together this morning, this cloudy morning, into a religious community of heart and mind. Some of you who are here this morning have known one another for many years, and some of you who have come this morning for the very first time. Wherever you are in your journey, you are indeed welcomed into this gathering. This morning, I'll be sharing with you some images, stories, experiences, and reflections about Kuan Yin, the Buddhist goddess and Bodhisattva of compassion. I've found that Kuan Yin can stir religious imagination, disrupt notions of gender, and move us to reconsider the path of compassion. And so we come together this morning into religious community with this invitation to open our minds and our hearts. We light the chalice of our community.
Hello. My name is Maya, and I light this chalice for justice, equity, and the compassion in human relations.
Please stand as you are able and join us in affirming our covenant, and remain standing for the following hymn. Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now join in gathered spirit.
Our commitment to human fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. Therefore, we set aside this time in our gathering to share with one another the joys and concerns which are now shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. And there will be a moment at the latter part of our sharing when the cameras will be turned off. So if you would prefer to wait until that moment, I'll let you know when we do that. But we begin this morning with thoughts of Lori Kay, the woman who was killed by a shooter at synagogue services yesterday in Poway, California. Kay was attending the service to say Kaddish, the prayer of mourning, for her mother, who died in November. When the shooting started, her rabbi was injured, and she jumped in front of him to protect him. Our sympathy goes out to her husband and her adult daughter. We also hold in our hearts 9-year-old Noya Dahan, who moved to Poway with her family 8 years ago to escape the violence in Israel. Their house was spray painted with swastikas several years ago, and now the little girl's face and leg have been wounded by shrapnel at her synagogue. She remains in the hospital, and our thoughts are with her family. Almog Peretz, Dahan's brother-in-law, was also injured by shrapnel while helping children escape from the building during the shooting. And finally, Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein, the founder of the Chabad synagogue, was also wounded and will likely lose the index finger of his right hand. Even more senseless death and injury was averted only because the shooter's gun jammed. Hatred is an equal opportunity evil. Last month, the same shooter set fire to a nearby mosque. My friends, let us have in our minds not only outrage for this act, contempt for its author, and compassion for its victims. Let us also remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., echoing many other wise teachers throughout the ages. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing that it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder the hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. In the name of love, are there other joys or concerns to be shared?
Hi, I do have a concern for my friend Kelly. She's not a part of this congregation, but her mother passed away about a week and a half ago. They had a very close relationship, so I'm very concerned about her right now.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Scott. May seem funny, but my joy is the first sunburn of the season, caused by an absolutely inspiring morning at AIDS Walk yesterday, followed by going out to a farm outside of Lawrence with my sister-in-law, husband, and 2 grandnephews, and picking our own asparagus. The first treat of the spring.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Cynthia, and my joy is that my child Abby is now legally and forevermore Nikolai.
Oh, yay. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Yay. Hey, welcome.
Hi, Ann Marchin. We just got back Friday from Romania, and it was a tremendous experience to meet the congregation and our partner church and interact with Bila, and it was just a fantastic experience. So glad.
That's great.
I'd like to place a flower to honor Sarah Grier's mother, Nita, who died several weeks ago in Lawrence at Presbyterian Manor there. She is the person who welcomed my mother there a number of years ago. She lived across the hall and was such a loving, warmth person. My mother felt immediately at ease. I got to know Nita well. Miss her terribly.
Thanks for sharing that. Let's see. Carol, come on.
want to celebrate our good friend from the past, David Wida, who was one of the persons who had a lot to do with our initially becoming a welcoming congregation, and now we're going through another time of that, and was the one who, for many of us in the church, introduced us to more understanding of LGBT persons, etc. So I want to say how glad I am that he's here in Kansas City for a couple of weeks to visit us.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great.
So I have a joy. My youngest child will be graduating next month from high school. It is. So after 25 years, I'm retiring from homeschooling and running my homeschooling group. And so Matthew and I are going to travel for 3 months. So
you have a fabulous time.
Oh, hi, I'm Patty, and my grown daughter is really struggling right now, and if you guys will keep her in your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Am I saying that we're off camera? No? Okay. Okay, you guys. I have a few. The first is a joy for being part of the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council and for our opportunity to host the council's monthly meeting here in our building. It is by the power of mutual education, understanding, and action that the power of compassion works to diminish the power of hate in our larger community. This is a flower of appreciation also for those sponsors who have made it possible for our teams to attend the Council's Table of Faith event this Tuesday, where they will continue their education about the differences and commonalities in the various faith traditions of the world and their presence here in Kansas City. If you would like to join them for this colorful, engaging event, see the flyer in the foyer. This is a flower of joy for our partnership with Congregation Kol Ami, the Jewish community that worships here in our building. This Friday, all members of All Souls are invited to join the Kol Ami service on Friday evening for a special guest speaker on courage in the face of evil, standing against anti-Semitism, racism, and bigotry. There's a flyer in the foyer also about this event, and I hope after the events of yesterday that many of us will come together on Friday in solidarity with our Jewish neighbors and friends. And finally, place this flower in honor of the work of our custodian, Alsafi Ahmed, our rental coordinator, Charles Dickinson, our administrator, Leandra Salazar Slaughter, our awesome calendar manager, Sue Trowbridge, and members of the Building and Grounds Committee and the board, all of whose work makes possible the ministry of hospitality that is part of our congregation's mission to the city. Now, will you join me in the words of the congregational response on the screen? Let us speak together. Spirit of love and compassion, bestow wisdom upon us. Help us to see all humanity through eyes of tireless kindness and hope. Help us to experience steady patience and compassion for all beings and for ourselves. Let us be gentle, let us be peaceful, and shine beauty into this world. At this time, our children will depart from us to their classes with song.
Good morning. My name is Anthony Edwards, and I have the pleasure of serving as your music director. And one of my great joys in life is being able to serve on the board of the AIDS Service Foundation. The AIDS Service Foundation was created to help raise funds and awareness for HIV/AIDS in Kansas City. And we serve the 4 AIDS service organizations here in town, as well as some community grants. With us this morning is the CEO of what we all know as Good Samaritan Project, Carolyn Huffman, and she's going to have a surprise for us as we share their new brand with us. Please help me welcome Carolyn Huffman.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for inviting me to worship with you this morning. I'd just like to offer you a little of the history of the organization that I'm blessed to be the CEO for. The Good Samaritan Project was officially chartered on May 1st, 1984. It was initially affiliated with the Metropolitan Community Church and the Good Samaritan House, which was a hospice live-in facility that provided 24-hour care to a handful of residents at that time that had AIDS. It was modeled after the Shanty program in San Francisco, which offered one-to-one peer support by trained volunteers. Due to the overwhelming needs of the community and the church's inability to sustain the organization, Good Samaritan Project ended their affiliation with the church in 1986 and became a standalone nonprofit 501c3 organization. Many changes have occurred since the AIDS crisis in the mid-1980s, and our organization has evolved as well over the years and has become one of the largest testing and care management organizations for individuals living with HIV and AIDS in Kansas City. Over half of those that are served by our organization are persons of color. Additionally, half of those that we serve fall well below the 100% federal poverty line level. Some of the individuals that we served for many years are long-term survivors and are now dealing with the onset of multiple medical comorbidities. One of the things I'm proudest of is that we have a viral suppression rate of 93%. The rate for the Kansas City Transitional Grant Area is 86%. So I'd like to think we helped the Kansas City average. The national viral suppression rate is 62%. Bruce Richmond, who is a good friend to the AIDS Service Foundation, recently came and we hosted him at our organization, and he's founder of the U Equal You campaign. And he told me that he believes that our organization has the best viral suppression rate of any place in the United States. I was ecstatic. So earlier this year, our organization moved from Midtown at 3030 Walnut to 5008 Prospect Avenue. And this move gives our organization a great opportunity to be at the epicenter of what's happening for HIV and AIDS in Kansas City. The zip code that we're in, 64130, is one of the 2 zip codes in the Kansas City area that has the highest rate of HIV and AIDS, and it's also the zip code with the lowest life expectancy. So over the last several years, we are getting increased feedback that having Good Samaritan in an organization's name was very polarizing, as there were some in this community that thought we were affiliated with a church or a religious organization. For many individuals that had either been shamed or ostracized by their church, the fact that we called ourselves had Good Samaritan in the name was very off-putting for them. Also, the name really did not reflect what we do. So as we embarked on the rebranding journey, and our main goal was to honor the legacy, yet to remain sustainable and relevant for many years to come. I hope that the person that's sitting in my seat 35 years from now thinks that we really kind of got it right. And we also needed to reflect the evolution of HIV and AIDS treatment. Many of that we're serving are not only successfully living with HIV and AIDS, but and surviving, but they're thriving as well. So Thrive Health Connection was the best choice for our new name based on a lot of input. We did surveys and focus groups and got a lot of input from many individuals. And it's a good fit for the mission of the organization and the vision that we have, and it's, I think, very forward thinking. The word thrive is positive and uplifting. It represents wellness, the whole person care, and resources for thriving in life. And that's an aspirational goal for those that we're serving. Health Connection clearly defines our role as a provider linked to health services, as well as a connector to the many community and partner resources. Our new tagline, Educate, Empower, Enrich, represents the aims of our programs. Our new colors are vibrant and bold and purposefully gender neutral to represent inclusion. And the bright red orange that you'll see there is a colorful nod to the fact that we're in a bright orange building. I think we have a picture of it. So if you're at all familiar with what used to be the Blue Hills Community Development Building at 50th and Prospect, we've taken over that whole top floor of that building, and you can't miss the building. It is truly bright orange. So So this year we're celebrating 35 years in the community, and we're reaching out to those that we've served, volunteers, current and former board members, as well as anybody else that has had a connection with the organization, and asking them to share their personal story. We want to increase awareness of HIV and AIDS over the years, and the role that our organization has played locally in helping them. The stories will either be done in print or in video, and if the person is not feeling comfortable sharing their name, they can do it anonymously. So if you know someone that would like to be a part of that, please let me know. So finally, I would say to you, using a strength-based approach that recognizes that despite the impact of stigma and discrimination against those individuals with HIV and AIDS, we champion ourselves at Thrive Health Connection as being an organization that consistently practices radical hospitality, cultural humility, and meaningful inclusion. We intentionally create a warm, welcoming, and safe environment for anyone who needs our support. The goal is always, and I mean always, to offer a gesture of extraordinary compassion. Even if we're busy or feeling stressed or feeling tired, our staff is expected to extend themselves to help others and let them know they matter to our organization. I see way too many individuals on a daily basis that don't feel like they belong in this community. And we need a stronger sense of belonging for everyone. And we need to kind of renew our sense that we're all in this together. So we're very excited about our future at Thrive Health Connection. And I invite you to be on that journey with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Please join me in the dedication of our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Gatha in praise of Kuan Yin from Daily Liturgies of the Cham School, 1834. The Bodhisattva is the perfectly penetrating one. Born in the forest of 7 jewels, her true form has 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. She sits in the Podalaka Palace. Sprinkling sweet dew with a willow branch, she nourishes the entire Dharma realm universally. Displaying her supernatural powers and riding on 1,000 layers of ocean waves, she arrives in full splendor in this place of truth. The grace of the wondrous Kuan Yin Bodhisattva is hard to repay. Her purity and splendor are the result of spiritual cultivation carried out in many kalpas. 32 different manifestations are found in many worlds. She has been transforming beings in Jambudvipa for innumerable kalpas. The sweet dew in the bottle is constantly sprinkled everywhere. The willow branch in her hand has been there for numberless autumns. 1,000 prayers rising from 1,000 places are all answered. She has always been a boat transporting people from the ocean of suffering.
This is called There Was a Time, from the Interpreter of Longings. It was written somewhere between 1200 and 1235, translated from Arabic. There was a time I would reject those who were not of my faith. But now, my heart has grown capable of taking in all forms. It's a pasture for gazelles, an abbey for monks, a table for the Torah, Kaaba for the pilgrim. My religion is love. So whichever the route love's caravan shall take, that shall be the path of my faith.
One summer, I was walking through a Goodwill store in a small town in northern Minnesota when I spotted across the room the words Kuan Yin. It was over on the shelf where the puzzles are, and I thought to myself, did I really see that? What is Kuan Yin doing on the shelves of the Goodwill here in northern Minnesota? And sure enough, it was a puzzle of Kuan Yin on the rockery, 99 cents. How perfect, I thought, to find Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion, sitting on the shelves of the Goodwill. As it turns out, the Kuan Yin of the puzzle was the one that's housed here at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. It's the Kuan Yin I've come to think of as the Kansas City Kuan Yin. Some of you have seen her there, I'm sure, and maybe some of you are familiar with that puzzle, which I think must be out of print now. I enjoyed putting the puzzle together. The pieces were of varied, interesting shapes and colors, and I found it quite challenging at times to figure out how they fit together. And putting that puzzle together has proved to be a helpful metaphor for my journey towards understanding Kuan Yin, except that my understanding, unlike that completed puzzle, will always be incomplete. Kuan Yin started off as a male figure in India sometime during the early centuries of our Common Era. Avalokitesvara, as he was called, was the Bodhisattva of compassion and mercy. After Buddhism moved from India into China, Avalokitesvara slowly begins to appear with female characteristics. For some time, he, she appears quite androgynous, having both or indistinguishable male, female characteristics. By 15th century China, Kuan Yin became generally perceived as female, although male and androgynous forms continue even today. From China, Kuan Yin traveled up through Korea and Japan and down into Southeast Asia, combining Buddhism with indigenous traditions. Along the way, she's called by many names and acquires new legends and appearances. Kuan Yin traveled out of Asia into Hawaii with the Chinese plantation workers during the 19th century, and then to American shores, especially during the 20th century with Asian immigration. She was adopted and adapted and further transformed here by American feminists in the late 20th century, and more recently has gained a following within the transgendered community. Makes sense, doesn't it? Kuan Yin goes by many names and spelling. Sometimes it's spelled K-W or K-U-A-N, or with a G, Guan Yin. In Japan, she's Canon. In Vietnam, Guanam, and there are many other variations. Her name is translated as well in a variety of ways. She who hears the cries of the world is one of the most common. She who hears the cries of the world. In our world today, images, statues, temples, shrines, personal altars, books, they all proliferate. She continues to gather stories and to transform in appearance and meaning. And this is not an uncommon story for how any religion develops and changes, being adopted and adapted, picking up things that is shared through encounters with new people in new places, new cultures. I want to share with you just a few of the many images of Kuan Yin that I've encountered over the years. In the first slide, this is the one that's familiar to you. This is Kuan Yin on the rockery, and it's the image from the puzzle. It's from the South China Sea, made of wood, and you can see in person some of the cracks that have started in the wood. And many layers of paint from the 11th or 12th century. She's seated in what is referred to as the royal ease pose. This Kuan Yin is larger than life, measuring 8 feet tall. She's in a quiet and spacious room with subdued lighting that very much feels like a temple. It's one of the better known images of Kuan Yin, especially in this country. And the next slide. And here's a little larger context for her. And then the next slide. This is the oldest image that I have to share with you today. It's a stone culture that comes from about 1,500 years ago from an unknown artist in China. I saw it last fall when I was visiting the Museum of the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. It's labeled as the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara Kuan Yin, and I'm going to guess that it's about 4 feet high. It was one of many such pieces there, and I hadn't ever seen such a stiff-looking Kuan Yin before, and so I was curious about it. An older woman from China was also there at the museum. As it turns out, she was a devotee of Kuan Yin and was very pleased with my interest. She spoke not very much English at all, and I spoke no Chinese. And finally, with the help of her daughter, I understood her to say that these figures were probably in temples, and that when Kuan Yin gained popularity and people wanted images in their homes, the images began to grow softer. She gained softer features. Now, I don't know if scholars would agree, but it made some kind of intuitive sense to me. I very much valued our attempts at conversation there, looking in that museum across those barriers of language and cultures. And our conversation ended with her invitation for me to visit China and many more Kuan Yins. This next image is called the 11-headed Avalokitesvara. Comes from the 7th or 8th century China, and it's now housed at the Cantor Museum of Art at Stanford University in a collection of bronze sculptures. It's quite tiny. The 11 heads are thought to allow Avalokitesvara to be aware of all the suffering in the world and respond to it in compassionate ways. And you can see, well, you probably can't see, across the top of her head, of their head, I'll say, the various heads, 11 heads. This next one, the theme of attending to the suffering of the world is really core to Kuan Yin. And here's one of innumerable examples of Kuan Yin with 1,000 arms, 1,000 arms, 1,000 hands, or 1,000 eyes. This one is from a temple in China, and you can see it has a very large presence. One of the most persistent stories about Kuan Yin is a miracle story that's thought to originate in China, as Kuan Yin was assuming female characteristics. It's the story of Princess Miaozhong. Briefly, the story is that Princess Miaozhong was very drawn to Buddhism early in her life and was characterized as a child full of goodness. When the time came for her to marry, she refused to marry, and this, of course, enraged her father, the king. He punishes her. Eventually, she's sent to a nunnery where she wants to go anyway. And when she does not consent to marriage, he burns down the nunnery. And there are many different versions about what happens then to Princess Miaozhong. Eventually, the king falls ill. A monk tells him the only remedy is medicine made from the hands and eyes of someone who has never felt anger. And he tells the king where such a person is to be found, who is, of course, the king's own daughter. And she willingly gives her eyes and arms to the king's messenger. The king recovers and eventually goes in search of the one who saved him. When he finds her, he recognizes her as his daughter. The king is full of remorse. He and his family convert to Buddhism. Princess Miao Shun's arms and eyes are restored 1,000 times over, and she's transformed into her true form, the 1,000 eyes and 1,000 armed Kuan Yin. Well, there'd be quite a bit to unpack in that story, so we're not going to go there. Many Buddhists celebrate the birthday of Princess Miao Jung as the birthday of Kuan Yin. There are many stories about Kuan Yin. This next one, she's pictured with a parrot, which is her animal that is often sent out as a messenger. She's often pictured as white-robed, sometimes riding the waves of the ocean, going to save those who are in distress in a boat or drowning, or she's standing on a big fish, and she is many times associated with water and the moon. She sometimes rides dragons. In this next slide, we see Kuan Yin holding a baby. She is known to help women who want children. There are some other images where she is sending down a child in a bubble to a woman, to a family who wants a child. And she is known to help women in childbirth. This image could oftentimes remind us of the Christian Madonna and Child. Kuan Yin is said to have a special compassion for those who miscarry or have stillbirths. This next image is, I think, a particularly interesting image. It's a ceramic head about 7 inches high from the 14th century China. It's currently housed at the Metropolitan Museum in New York and identified as Kuan Yin. It's from a larger statue. It's one of several images of Kuan Yin with a mustache, suggestive of somewhat ambiguous gender. And the next slide, perhaps one of the most common images surrounding Kuan Yin are a lotus blossom, a vase, and a branch of willow. It's said that the vase holds the healing waters of compassion, and the willow is used to sprinkle the water throughout the world. There are many more, countless images and stories of Kuan Yin. She's sometimes a savior, sometimes she's an independent woman who defies family and social expectations. She can be fierce and strong. She cares for prostitutes, particularly, and all the destitute of the world. She cares for all beings, for animals. I've seen recent paintings of her from feminist artists that imagine her as part of the hills and the mountains, part of the earth itself. Then I want to share with you a few reflections from Sandy Butchert in her book, Discovering Kuan Yin, about the nature of this goddess and the Buddhist context. And I think it's helpful. Sandy herself is a Buddhist practitioner. She says, I understand that to use the term God or goddess when speaking of a Buddhist sacred entity is to simplify and obscure its true nature. In Asia, in particularly, there's a difference between the lay person's perception of such a figure and the view taken of it by a Buddhist monk or nun. To a lay person, Kuan Yin is a powerful goddess, a divine being who cares especially about women's concerns. She will come if you call her, chant her name, put offerings on her altar. She will save you from disaster, give you a child, heal your illness, and lessen your sorrows. She is friend and mother. She teaches compassion and patience in the crucible of daily life. She is as real as the wind in the trees. On the other hand, the Buddhist monk chanting the same gatha looks to the figure of Kuan Yin to help transform herself. She seeks through chanting and bowing and visualizing Kuan Yin to pass into the spaciousness of true realization. That is, she views Kuan Yin as an aid to her practice, as a symbolic figure whose compassionate actions teach and purify and ultimately show the way to liberation from suffering. I've been thinking this last month about my relationship to Kuan Yin, what she means to me, and why I find her so compelling. I think at the heart of it is a long-time interest in goddess imagery that began when I was a young woman attracted to feminist spirituality. I eventually took my interest into seminary and then into doctoral work in archaeology, trying to understand the real meanings behind ancient female imagery. And all along, I've identified as a Unitarian Universalist, a religious naturalist, a humanist, a non-theist. Sometimes it seems to me that my interest in goddess imagery has to do with the way that it tickles my religious imagination and balances out the heavy cultural associations between God, divinity, the sacred, and masculinity. I know that most religious liberals don't consciously think of God as male. As one UU said to me, I don't think of God as male. To me, he's more of a spirit. It's a deeply unconscious association. I think for many of us, women and men, there can be something very affirming about the image of a divine female, affirming of female body and sexuality, creativity, female power, female agency and will. I think of it as a counterbalance to the masculine images that pervade our religious and secular worlds. One of the things that is very compelling to me about Kuan Yin is that she is a living goddess. I don't know how else to say it. She has millions of devotees in many parts of the world. I'm not a devotee, nor am I a scholar of Kuan Yin. Indeed, I am quite cautious, even today, of wading into territory that is sacred to many. There is much that I don't understand, and I believe we really need to tread cautiously and with respect into an understanding of the religious traditions of others, especially when it's of another culture. And yet, I do feel a sense of affinity with Kuan Yin. I have a small statue of her. That last image was one that I keep. And I find that when I spend time with it, it brings me a sense of peace. Sometimes I have a sense of compassion that flows towards me. And sometimes it's a reminder to open my heart to others. I think the primary meaning of Kuan Yin has to do with compassion and love. When we experience Kuan Yin's compassion coming towards us, it sometimes seems to me that we are actually experiencing compassion for ourselves. I don't know which comes first, self-compassion or compassion for others. I think they must go together. Compassion is born from the awareness that we all suffer, and it's about making space in our hearts for that awareness and our desire to help alleviate the suffering, making space for compassion to enter our hearts and to enter our lives. I think back to that reading from the Sufi poet shared at the beginning. For me, I think it is more aspirational than always actualized, but it does capture something. There was a time I would reject those who were not of my faith, but now my heart has grown capable of taking in all forms. I think it captures the impulse of our Universalist hearts, that our hearts could become a pasture for gazelles, an abbey for monks. This deep and compassionate embrace of others, this is so what our world needs now. As the poet says, whichever the route love's caravans shall take, that shall be the path of my faith. May it be so.
Please stand as you are able and join us in singing When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
The closing words that I want to share with you come from the Reverend Kay Jorgensen, who is the co-founder of Faithful Fools, a ministry to people who live on the streets in San Francisco. Here are her words, and if you're inspired, join hands with those around you. I don't know if this is part of your tradition, but if you're not comfortable with that, just give a signal. Or touch an elbow or something. May love surround us. May joy gladden us. And may peace lie deep within. And may our lives and the lives of all those we touch go well. Blessed be. Amen. Have a good week.